So the first thing we need to know if we're talking about the web is what a URL is. Now, I'm guessing a lot of you already know what this is, but let's be very precise and define what a URL is and what it's made up of. So a URL, it's some string, you've probably seen them before, and it uniquely identifies something on the web. So again, if you think of this web as a bunch of computers and they're all serving different data, the URL says, I want this piece of data. It's like if you think about the Memex analogy, I want this card in the library. So I want this particular file, not any of the others. That's what the URL does for us. So when you go into your browser and you type a URL, you're telling the browser, this is the exact thing that I want. Now, if you look at a URL, and here's an example down here for you, we can break it down into different parts. So that's what we'll do now. So you've probably seen the : / before, and maybe you've wondered what goes before this. The first thing that comes here is the scheme, and it says, how do you retrieve this data? And for now, there's only two options we'll put here. One is HTTP, which says, please fetch the data and don't bother with encryption. And the second one is HTTPS, which says, actually do some extra encryption when you send the data over. How those actually work, we will talk about later, but for now, that's what the scheme is. It says, how do you fetch that data? Do you fetch it using this unencrypted protocol? Do you fetch it using this encrypted protocol? There are also other more exotic protocols you could put here, but for this class and for most of the internet and web, it'll probably be either HTTP or HTTPS. So that's the scheme. It says how to get the data. Now we skip past the double slashes, and we start reading this thing, which is after the double slashes, before the next slash. This is called the domain. And the way I think of this is it identifies which web server to contact. So remember in our model of the web, there's lots of browsers accessing data, and there's lots of web servers that are serving data to the world. This says, I want this particular server. Not any of the others, I want this one. So if I go back to this picture, it says, I want this server. I don't want this one. I don't want any other one. The domain uniquely identifies one of these servers. Now, technically, that's not entirely true nowadays. This could represent multiple servers, for example. Like Google probably isn't one computer serving to the world. It's probably a big data center. But we're not going to worry about that. The analogy for us is that this identifies one unique web server. That's a good enough model for what we're trying to do. And we'll also see that this is usually some names separated by dots, and what those mean comes later. But that's what the domain is. It says, I want this machine. I don't want any of the others. Now, sometimes you will see some extra things show up here. So one thing you might see is location. I don't think I have ever seen the username before, so we're not going to talk about it. But something you will see sometimes is a number that comes after the domain. That's called a port, which we will see again later. But you can think of the port as saying, this machine is actually running two programs, and I want this one, but not that one. So that's what the port does. If, for some reason, the machine that I've chosen is running multiple applications, and they're both serving web data, the number can say, I want this one, and I don't want that one. So sometimes you see the port, but it's also not super common. But that's the domain, and sometimes it comes with the port. So now we hit the slash. Everything after the slash is called a path. And the way that I think of a path is once you choose a domain, you say, I want this machine, not any of the others. You now have to specify which file on that machine you want. So if you think of that machine as having a file system, then you're saying, this is the file path that I want on that machine. Now again, web servers don't have to work like this, but it's a useful model if you're seeing this for the first time. So for example here, the slash says, start at the home folder, go find a folder called xsourcist, and then in that folder, please find a file called avian.html, and please give me that file. That's what the path says. It says, go to this server, and then once you're on that server, it has all these files, and I want to go into this folder and find this file. And if you don't put anything here, you're saying, just give me the root directory at the very top. Again, servers don't have to do this, but it's a good model for now. So that's the path. So when you see a URL, you can break it down into these three pieces, and that's a useful way to identify something on the internet or on the web. I should probably stop mixing those up, but it's on the web. Okay.